My name is Charmaine. I am 35 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. The morning after my 35th birthday, they summoned me to their Maryland mansion. Between sips of expensive tea, my mother slid a check across the table and smirked. "You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. We sold your U Street building for $2 million. I simply looked at the forged contract and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account I previously managed, and emailed my lawyer. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house, with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. But today was different. Today I was fighting back. The air in my parents' sprawling Maryland mansion always felt heavy, thick with the scent of fresh lilies and unspoken judgments. It was 9 in the morning, less than 24 hours after I had quietly celebrated my birthday alone with a glass of wine. I had received no calls or texts from my family the day before. Instead, I woke up to an urgent message from my father, Pastor Thomas, demanding my immediate presence. I sat on the edge of the plush white sofa, my posture perfect, my expression neutral. Across from me sat my mother, Vivian. She was dressed impeccably in a silk blouse, her hair perfectly styled, as if she were about to step up to the church podium. Next to her was my younger sister, Kiara, the undisputed golden child, aggressively scrolling through her phone. Beside Kiara was her husband, DeAndre, leaning back in the armchair with an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. My mother pushed a crisp piece of paper across the glass coffee table. It was a cashier check made out to me for $100,000. I looked at the check, then up at her. What is this, Mother? She sighed dramatically as if dealing with me was the greatest burden of her life. It is your cut, Charmaine. Your father and I have made an executive family decision. We sold that old commercial building your grandparents left you on U Street. The deal closed yesterday with Apex Corporation for $2 million. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch in the room. The audacity of her statement hung in the air like a physical weight. My grandparents had left that historic building exclusively to me because they knew I was the only one responsible enough to maintain it. They knew my parents were obsessed with appearances and would squander any asset to fund their lavish lifestyle. "You sold my building," I repeated, my voice steady, despite the rapid beating of my heart. "A building that is entirely in my name." DeAndre let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Come on, Charmaine. What were you going to do with it anyway? You are just a software developer. You write code in a dark room all day. You do not know the first thing about real estate or venture capital. I am launching a massive tech startup next month, and the family needs liquidity to back my vision." Kiara finally looked up from her phone, her tone dripping with condescension. "Exactly. DeAndre is actually building generational wealth. Mom and Dad did you a favor. That building was just gathering dust, and honestly, you do not have the business acumen to maximize its potential. DeAndre needs the seed money." I looked back down at the check. "So let me get this straight. You sold my property to Apex Corporation for $2 million, gave the entire deposit to DeAndre for a startup that does not exist yet, and decided a $100,000 tip would keep me quiet." My father walked into the room just then, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He carried himself with the righteous authority of a man who believed God approved of his every action. "Do not use that tone with your mother, Charmaine. We are a family, and families support each other. You have a steady paycheck. Your sister and DeAndre are taking a leap of faith. We used the old power of attorney you signed when you were in college to facilitate the transfer. The $2 million wire hit our accounts yesterday, and we have already transferred the funds to DeAndre's business account." My mind raced, categorizing the legal violations happening right in front of me. The power of attorney my father mentioned was a limited medical proxy I had signed 15 years ago before a minor surgery. It granted absolutely no financial authority. For them to use it to sell real estate meant my mother had completely forged the documents. Not only had she forged my signature, but receiving a $2 million wire transfer across state lines based on fraudulent paperwork constituted federal wire fraud. I did not yell. I did not cry. My analytical brain kicked in. When someone is digging their own grave, you do not take away their shovel. "This is theft," I said plainly, watching their reactions. My mother slammed her hand on the table, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the glass. "Theft. How dare you? After everything we have done for you, who paid for your braces, who put clothes on your back, you are a selfish, ungrateful daughter. We are trying to elevate this family name and you are being stubborn over a crumbling brick building." "You mean the building that is situated in one of the most rapidly gentrifying commercial districts in Washington, D.C., I countered. "The building that was generating steady passive income. And as for things you have done for me, let us not forget what happened when I was 18. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. They hated when I brought up the past. "You drained my college savings account." I continued, my voice cold and precise. "The fund Grandma set up for my education. You drained every single penny of it to buy Kiara a brand new luxury car for her high school graduation because she threw a tantrum about wanting to arrive in style. I had to take out massive student loans and work 3 jobs to get my degree in computer science. You did not support me then, and you certainly have no right to steal from me now." Kiara rolled her eyes. "Are you still whining about a car from a decade ago? Get over it, Charmaine. You are 35. Stop living in the past. We are talking about the future now. DeAndre is going to be a millionaire and we are letting you be a part of it. Take the 100 grand and sign the final release forms." DeAndre leaned forward, trying to look intimidating. He was a large man, heavily reliant on designer labels to mask his lack of actual substance. "Listen to your sister. Apex Corporation is a massive equity firm. They do not play games. The deal is done. The money is spent. You cannot undo it. If you try to make a fuss, their corporate lawyers will crush you. Just take the check and go back to your computer screen." I picked up the cashier check. The paper felt crisp between my fingers. I looked at the 6-figure amount. For a moment, I let them believe they had won. I let them see me stare at the money. My father smiled, a sickening expression of triumph. "See, Vivian," my father said, turning to my mother. "I told you she would see reason. She understands the importance of family unity." I slowly ripped the check precisely in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. Kiara gasped. My mother stood up abruptly. "What are you doing?" Vivian screeched. "Are you out of your mind?" I placed the torn halves back on the glass table. "I do not want your hush money, and I will not sign any final release forms. You did not sell my building. You sold a lie." DeAndre stood up now, his face flushing with anger. "You stupid woman! Do you not understand what I just said? The money is already in my account. I have already signed vendor contracts for the startup. If you blow this deal, I will be legally liable." "That sounds like a personal problem, DeAndre," I replied smoothly. "A very expensive personal problem. I would advise you not to spend another dime of that money, assuming you actually have it." My father stepped toward me, his voice dropping into the threatening register he usually reserved for church staff who defied him. "Charmaine Hughes, you will sign the closing documents right now. You are not going to ruin your brother-in-law future out of spite. I will not allow you to disrespect this family and jeopardize our standing in the community. You are acting like an arrogant child." I stood up, smoothing out my tailored skirt. I was no longer the frightened teenager who had cried when her college fund was stolen. I was a woman who built complex software infrastructure for a living. I designed security systems that protected millions of dollars. My family had no idea who they were actually dealing with. "I am acting like the legal owner of the U Street property," I said, looking my father directly in the eyes. "An owner who never authorized a sale. An owner who knows exactly the difference between a medical proxy and a real estate power of attorney." You thought you could steamroll me because you still see me as the quiet girl you pushed into the background. I picked up my purse and slipped the strap over my shoulder. Charmaine, my mother warned, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sudden panic. If you walk out that door and ruin this deal, you are no longer a part of this family. We will cut you off completely. We will tell everyone at the church and the country club exactly how selfish you are. You will have no one. I smiled. A genuine bright smile that made my mother flinch. You cannot cut off someone who has already left, mother. And you cannot sell a building you do not own. Have a wonderful day. I turned and walked out of the opulent living room, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Behind me, I could hear DeAndre cursing loudly and my father trying to calm my mother down. The heavy mahogany front door closed behind me with a satisfying thud, shutting out the noise of their panic. The morning air was crisp and refreshing. I unlocked my car, sat in the driver's seat, and took a deep breath. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was an email from my private wealth manager confirming the irrevocable trust I had established yesterday. My grandfather building was legally untouchable. My parents thought they had played a brilliant hand. They thought they had secured a massive payday at my expense. They did not realize they had just triggered a trap that would dismantle their entire fake empire. As I started the engine and drove away from the mansion, I felt a profound sense of calm. The war had just begun, but I had already checkmated them. I just had to wait for them to realize it. They believed their social status would shield them from consequence. They were gravely mistaken. The truth was about to cost them absolutely everything they valued. Their greed had finally sealed their ultimate downfall. The drive from my parents' estate to my downtown office took exactly 45 minutes. That gave me enough time to transition from the betrayed daughter to the senior forensic accountant. My firm occupied the top floor of a sleek glass building, a fortress of data and financial truth. When I stepped off the elevator, the familiar hum of servers and the sharp scent of espresso grounded me. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Maya, was waiting at my desk. She did not offer her usual morning greeting. Instead, she silently handed me a thick manila envelope bearing the red urgent stamp of a premier corporate law firm. I walked into my corner office, closed the heavy glass door, and sliced the envelope open. Inside was a cease and desist order and an aggressive legal demand letter from the General Counsel of Apex Corporation. The language was cold, calculated, and designed to intimidate. They were officially threatening me with federal fraud charges, breach of contract, and intentional sabotage of a commercial real estate transaction. According to the document, Apex Corporation had executed the purchase agreement in good faith. They attached a copy of the contract, and right there on the signature line was my name, flawlessly forged by my mother. But the second attachment was the one that made my blood run cold. It was the power of attorney. I scrutinized the document under the bright light of my desk lamp. My mother had taken the limited medical proxy I signed 15 years ago and completely altered the scope of the document. She had hired a shady notary from their church congregation to stamp it, creating a legally binding illusion that she had full control over my financial assets. Based on this fraudulent document, Apex Corporation had wired $2 million as a non-refundable deposit directly into a joint account controlled by my parents. The legal demand was explicit. Hand over the physical keys and the title deed to the U Street building within 48 hours or Apex would involve the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The letter detailed how my refusal to vacate the premises was being viewed as an extortion attempt by the legal owner to extract more money from the corporation after the deposit had already been paid. They had cornered me. To the outside world and to Apex, I looked like a greedy seller trying to hold a massive equity firm hostage. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and let out a slow breath. If I fought the sale publicly right now, Apex would immediately discover the fraud. The moment they realized the power of attorney was faked, my mother would be indicted for forgery. And because the $2 million crossed state lines electronically, both of my parents would be charged with federal wire fraud. That carried a mandatory prison sentence. My parents were so blinded by their greed and their desire to fund DeAndre that they had handed me the very weapon needed to destroy them. Any normal person would have picked up the phone. A normal daughter would have called her parents screaming about the demand letter, warning them that the FBI was about to knock down the doors of their Maryland mansion. But they had made it perfectly clear this morning that I was not family. I was collateral damage in their pursuit of generational wealth. They had gleefully thrown me to the wolves, expecting me to be eaten alive by corporate lawyers. So I did not call them. I did not warn them. Instead, I turned to my dual monitor setup and cracked my knuckles. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial ruin, they had picked the absolute worst opponent. I was not just a software developer. I built the very forensic accounting software that the government used to track missing money. It was time to find out exactly where that $2 million had gone. I started with DeAndre. My brother-in-law loved to brag about his brilliant tech startup, but arrogant men always leave a digital trail. I accessed public corporate registries, tax databases, and property records. I ran his full legal name, his social security number, and the names of his known associates through my proprietary tracking systems. It took less than 2 hours for the carefully constructed facade of his business empire to completely disintegrate on my screens. There was no tech startup. There were no vendor contracts. There was no seed money investment. DeAndre had registered a shell company in Delaware exactly 3 weeks ago, right around the time my parents first contacted Apex Corporation about the building. The company had no employees, no product, and no physical address other than a virtual mailbox at a strip mall. I dug deeper, tracing the flow of the $2 million. My parents had wired the funds to DeAndre's business account yesterday morning. By yesterday evening, that account was completely empty. The money had not been used to buy servers, hire developers, or lease office space. Instead, it had been splintered into dozens of smaller transactions, all hovering just under the $10,000 reporting threshold to avoid triggering banking alerts. This technique was called smurfing, and it was a textbook money laundering strategy. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I tracked the splintered funds. The money flowed through various offshore payment gateways, eventually landing in accounts associated with high-stakes underground gambling syndicates. DeAndre was not an entrepreneur. He was a degenerate gambler with catastrophic debts. He had convinced my parents to sell my inheritance, not to build a business, but to save his own life from violent creditors. And my parents, so desperate to have a successful son-in-law to parade around their country club and megachurch, had eagerly committed a federal crime to fund him. The sheer audacity of it all was staggering. Kiara, my golden child sister, was married to a fraud who had just vaporized $2 million of stolen corporate money in less than 24 hours. And now Apex Corporation was coming after me for the asset. My office phone rang, pulling me from the glowing screens. It was the lead counsel for Apex Corporation, a man named Richard Vance. I let it ring twice before picking up, keeping my voice perfectly level. Charmaine Hughes speaking. Ms. Hughes. Richard barked, his voice laced with corporate arrogance. I assume you received our courier package. I am calling to confirm what time your legal representation will be dropping off the keys to the U Street property. We have contractors ready to begin demolition on Monday morning, and we will not tolerate any further delays. I tapped a pen against my desk. I received your package, Mr. Vance. However, there seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding the ownership of the property. I have no intention of handing over any keys, nor will you be conducting any demolition. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Listen to me very carefully, he sneered. We have a legally binding contract signed by your authorized representative. We have wired $2 million. If you try to hold out for a higher purchase price, I will personally see to it that you are buried in so much litigation you will never recover. We will freeze your assets, garnish your wages, and drag you through federal court. I smiled, though he could not see it. You are welcome to try, Mr. Vance, but I suggest you take a much closer look at that power of attorney your team processed so carelessly. As a corporate lawyer, you should know that a medical proxy from 2010 does not grant real estate transaction rights. You failed to do your due diligence and you wired $2 million to an unauthorized third party. Silence hung heavy on the line. I could practically hear his brain scrambling to pull up the digital file of the document. When he spoke again, his voice had lost a fraction of its bravado, replaced by a defensive edge. The document was notarized. If there is fraud involved, that is a matter between you and your family. We still expect the property. Actually, it is a matter between you and the federal government, I corrected him smoothly. Because as of yesterday, the U Street property does not even belong to me as an individual. It is securely held in an irrevocable trust. It cannot be sold, transferred, or demolished. Your contract is null and void. I highly recommend you start looking for that $2 million because I can assure you it is already gone. I hung up the phone before he could respond. My heart was pounding, a mixture of adrenaline and cold satisfaction coursing through my veins. I had just declared war on a massive corporation, but I held the ultimate trump card. They could not touch my building, and the moment they realized their money had been gambled away by DeAndre, their legal wrath would pivot directly onto my parents. But I was not done. Letting Apex tear my family apart was too easy. My parents had spent my entire life prioritizing their public image over my well-being. They cared more about what their church congregation thought than they cared about their own daughter. I wanted to dismantle that image piece by piece. I printed out the complete financial forensics report on DeAndre. Every offshore account, every gambling debt, every smurfed transaction was documented in undeniable black and white. I slid the thick stack of papers into a clean folder. My parents were hosting a massive charity gala this weekend for my father's church. It was their most important social event of the year, a night designed entirely to show off their wealth and status to the elite families of Maryland. They wanted to play games with my livelihood. They wanted to steal my inheritance to fund a lie. I was going to let them put on their fancy clothes and smile for the cameras. And then I was going to burn their fake empire to the ground in front of everyone they respected. I packed up my briefcase, the legal demand letter safely tucked inside, alongside DeAndre's financial ruin. The corporation was coming for their money, and my family was entirely unprepared for the storm that was about to hit. I turned off my office lights and walked out into the city evening, ready to execute the next phase of my plan. By Wednesday morning, the social assassination was fully underway. My parents did not possess federal authority, but in the affluent African-American enclaves of Maryland, their social capital was absolute. My father leveraged his pulpit at the megachurch, while my mother mobilized her elite Jack and Jill networks. They moved with terrifying speed. I woke up to a barrage of text messages from distant relatives and family friends. The tone shifted universally from polite confusion to outright hostility. My mother had spun a masterful narrative. According to her tearful phone calls to the church elders, I was a deeply jealous daughter holding my family hostage. She claimed I was demanding an exorbitant payout to release a worthless building, intentionally sabotaging DeAndre and his brilliant new venture out of spite. They painted DeAndre as the visionary victim, and me as the greedy spinster trying to steal their generational wealth. It was a calculated strike designed to destroy my credibility before I could ever tell the truth. By noon, I had been removed from 3 separate community organizing committees without a single phone call of explanation. The isolation was immediate and suffocating. People I had known since childhood were suddenly looking at me through the distorted lens my parents had crafted. They did not know about the forged power of attorney or the missing $2 million. They only knew that Pastor Thomas and his elegant wife Vivian were heartbroken over their eldest daughter and her cruel betrayal. My mother knew exactly how to weaponize respectability politics. In her circle, family loyalty was paramount, and airing dirty laundry was a sin. By making the first move, she ensured that any defense I mounted would just look like desperate mudslinging. The trap was set, but it was aimed directly at my professional life. The first real blow landed precisely at 1 in the afternoon. My desk phone rang, displaying the caller identification of my largest corporate accounting client. They were a massive logistics firm headquartered in Baltimore, and their chief financial officer, a man named David, happened to serve on the deacon board at my father's church. When I answered the phone, David did not offer his usual warm greeting. His voice was cold, rigid, and entirely businesslike. "Charmaine," he began, his tone clipping every syllable. We are calling to inform you that we are terminating our forensic audit contract with your firm effective immediately. Our legal department will be sending over the formal cancellation paperwork by the end of the business day. I sat forward in my chair, my professional composure instantly kicking in. David, this is highly unusual, I replied smoothly. We are in the middle of a critical quarterly audit. Terminating the contract now will leave your financial disclosures vulnerable. Has there been an issue with my team performance? David sighed, a heavy judgmental sound that echoed through the receiver. Your team performance is not the issue. This is a matter of integrity. A forensic accountant must be completely above reproach. We have received disturbing information regarding your recent financial conduct and your attempts to extort money from your own family. We cannot risk our corporate reputation by associating with someone exhibiting such severe ethical lapses. We wish you the best. The line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back onto the cradle, my hands trembling slightly with pure, unadulterated rage. My father had actually done it. He had crossed the line from personal manipulation to professional sabotage. He had used his religious influence to cost my firm a contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars simply to punish me for not quietly accepting his theft. They were trying to starve me out, cutting off my income stream so I would be forced to capitulate and hand over the U Street property. They wanted to break me financially, mentally, and socially, but they fundamentally misunderstood how my mind worked. When you back a forensic accountant into a corner, they do not surrender. They start auditing your entire existence, as if losing my biggest client was not enough. My assistant Maya knocked gently on my glass door and walked in holding her tablet. Her face was pale, her expression a mix of pity and profound discomfort. You need to see this, she said quietly, placing the tablet on my desk. It was an Instagram video posted by my sister Kiara. The video already had tens of thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Kiara was sitting in her lavish living room, wearing minimal makeup to look vulnerable, her golden child blonde highlights catching the light perfectly. She was staring into the camera, tears streaming down her flawless cheeks. It was the performance of a lifetime, entirely fake, but devastatingly effective. Hey everyone, Kiara sniffled, wiping away a perfectly timed tear. I really did not want to bring family business to the internet, but I am just so broken right now. As many of you know, my husband DeAndre has been working tirelessly to launch his new tech startup. It is a dream he has poured his heart into, designed to create jobs in our community. My parents kindly sold an old, unused family property to help fund his vision. But my older sister Charmaine is trying to destroy it all. She is aggressively blocking the sale out of pure jealousy because she cannot stand to see us succeed. She is threatening lawsuits and trying to take everything from us. Please pray for our family during this dark time. I watched the video in stunned silence, then scrolled down to the comments section. It was a digital bloodbath. Hundreds of people from our community, from the church and from the Jack and Jill network, were tearing me apart. They called me bitter, toxic, and evil. They praised Kiara for her bravery and offered prayers for DeAndre's fictitious startup. Relatives who had never bothered to call me on my birthday were publicly declaring their disgust for my actions. Kiara had successfully weaponized the internet against me, painting herself as the innocent victim of my supposed cruelty. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was building a public defense, creating a digital paper trail of her innocence, just in case the $2 million they stole could not be recovered. The sheer audacity of her fake tears made my blood boil. Kiara was married to a man who had laundered $2 million of stolen corporate money through illegal gambling syndicates, and she was crying on the internet about my jealousy. I handed the tablet back to Maya, keeping my face completely blank. Thank you, Maya. Please return to your desk and forward all incoming calls to my voicemail. I am not to be disturbed for the rest of the afternoon. Maya nodded sympathetically and slipped out of the office, closing the door softly behind her. I was completely isolated. My community had turned against me. My family had betrayed me. My largest client had fired me based on a lie. I was standing on an island surrounded by a sea of toxic gossip and malicious intent. But as I sat alone in my silent office, the initial wave of anger began to recede, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. They had played their cards beautifully. They had controlled the narrative and struck the first blows. But they were playing a social game, unaware that we were actually engaged in a high-stakes legal war. Their social media sympathy and church gossip meant absolutely nothing against the crushing weight of federal fraud statutes. I turned my attention back to my computer screens, pulling up the comprehensive financial dossier I had compiled on DeAndre. The evidence was damning. Bank statements, wire transfer logs, offshore account routing numbers, and bankruptcy filings. It was all there, a perfect digital map of his criminal behavior. My parents thought their social capital could protect them, but social capital does not keep you out of federal prison. I began organizing the documents, placing them into a secure encrypted folder. I also pulled the forged power of attorney from the Apex Corporation demand letter and placed it alongside my irrevocable trust documents. The narrative they had built was entirely dependent on the illusion of their respectability. I was going to shatter that illusion permanently. My phone vibrated on my desk. It was a text message from my mother. The message was short and dripping with arrogant condescension. I hope you are enjoying the consequences of your stubbornness, Charmaine. Sign the final release forms for Apex by tomorrow and we might forgive you. Otherwise, you will have nothing left. The church knows the truth now. I stared at the glowing screen, a humorless smile touching my lips. Silence was my most powerful weapon. Let them believe they had won. Let them revel in their fake sympathy. I was going to execute a flawless, devastating legal strike in front of their entire world very soon to end this vicious family betrayal. Thursday evening brought a biting chill to downtown Washington, D.C. I reserved a secluded booth at a high-end steakhouse near DuPont Circle, needing a moment to breathe away from the absolute chaos. I ordered a glass of aged Cabernet, ignoring the constant influx of notifications from church members still participating in my social crucifixion. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the rich flavor ground my racing thoughts. I was reviewing a printed spreadsheet when the heavy chair across from me was violently pulled out. I looked up expecting the waiter. Instead, DeAndre slid into the booth. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and a sheen of frantic sweat coated his forehead. His eyes darted around the restaurant nervously before locking onto me. The polished veneer was completely gone, replaced by the twitchy desperation of a cornered animal. I slowly placed my pen down on the table and folded my hands. "You are trespassing on my dinner." "DeAndre," I said softly, keeping my voice perfectly level. "How did you even find me?" He leaned across the table, looming and aggressive. "Your assistant is not as loyal as you think," he sneered, smelling faintly of cheap whiskey. "I told her it was a family emergency. Now listen to me, Charmaine. We are done playing games. I am not here to ask for your permission anymore." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a crumpled set of legal documents. It was the final property release authorization for Apex Corporation. He slammed the papers down onto my spreadsheet. "Sign the damn papers right now." I looked at him, my expression unchanging. "Or what, DeAndre? Are you going to tell my mother to write another sad post about me? I am already excommunicated. Your threats have zero leverage." DeAndre's face twisted into an ugly sneer. He reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, his grip painfully tight. "I said sign it, you stuck-up witch. You think you can freeze this deal and walk away? You do not know who you are messing with. I will hire guys to visit that townhouse of yours in Alexandria. We will smash every window, destroy your servers, and make sure you never feel safe in your bed again. You sign this paper, or I will burn your life to the ground." I looked down at his hand gripping my wrist. "Take your hand off me," I commanded in a freezing whisper. He hesitated before releasing his grip. I picked up my napkin and wiped my wrist as if his touch had contaminated me. "You are threatening to vandalize my home over a tech startup. That seems extreme for a visionary CEO. Why the rush? Apex already wired the $2 million to your account. You have the capital. Why are you sweating like a pig in a slaughterhouse? He slammed his fist on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. Several patrons turned to look, but he did not care. Because the money is gone, he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. The money is freaking gone, Charmaine. I do not have a tech startup. I never had a tech startup. Do you understand me? I raised an eyebrow. Gone. How exactly does one lose $2 million in 24 hours? Because I owed people, he spit out the confession tumbling from his lips. Dangerous people. I got into a bad hole with a sports betting syndicate operating out of Baltimore and Vegas. They were going to break my legs. They were going to go after Kiara. When your idiot parents offered to sell that useless brick building to fund my fake company, it was the perfect out. As soon as the wire transfer hit the joint account, I routed every penny to the bookies to clear my debt. But now Apex is freezing the transaction because you will not hand over the title. If Apex reverses the wire, the syndicate will kill me. I sat back against the plush leather of the booth. You lied to my parents, I said slowly. You convinced my father, a respected pastor, and my mother, a woman obsessed with her social standing, to commit federal wire fraud and forgery to pay off your illegal gambling debts. And now that the corporation wants the physical asset they paid for, you are threatening to physically harm me to cover your tracks. DeAndre wiped the sweat from his forehead. They did not know the details, he muttered defensively. Vivian just wanted to brag to her country club friends about her tech founder son-in-law. Thomas wanted to look like the generous patriarch. They handed me the money. I did what I had to do to survive. Now you have to keep this family alive. If I go down, Charmaine, I am taking your parents with me. I will tell the feds Vivian forged the documents willingly. I will tell them Thomas knew. They will both rot in federal prison. You have to sign the release to make the sale legitimate. It is the only way to save them. I picked up my wine glass and took another sip. My parents had thrown me to the wolves to protect this man, and at the first sign of danger, he was ready to hand them over to the federal government to save his own skin. Does Kiara know? I asked casually. Does your devoted wife know that her husband is a degenerate gambler who just laundered $2 million of stolen corporate funds? DeAndre scoffed, a bitter and hollow sound echoing in the quiet space. Kiara only cares about the designer bags and the luxury cars. As long as the credit cards do not decline, she does not ask questions. But the cards are going to decline soon, Charmaine. If you do not sign this paper, Apex will launch a full investigation. The syndicate will come for me, and the FBI will come for your parents. You are the only one who can stop this. You are the only one who can save the family name. I looked at the crumpled release form sitting on my table. I looked at the man sweating and begging while simultaneously trying to threaten me. He thought he was manipulating my sense of familial duty. He thought the threat of my parents going to prison would force my hand. He had no idea that I had already severed those emotional ties. I had no family name left to protect. They had burned it to the ground. I reached into my purse. DeAndre's eyes lit up with desperate hope, thinking I was reaching for a pen. Instead, I pulled out a $20 bill and dropped it on the table to cover my glass of wine. I will not be signing anything, DeAndre. His face fell, the hope instantly curdling back into violent rage. Are you deaf? Did you not hear what I just said? They will kill me. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I heard every single word, DeAndre. And I find it fascinating that you think your gambling debts are my responsibility. You stole $2 million. You defrauded a massive corporation. You manipulated two greedy older people into committing federal crimes. Those are your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. He scrambled out of the booth, moving to block my path. I will destroy your house, he hissed, his fists clenched. I will ruin your life. I stepped right up to him, invading his personal space until he was forced to step back. My voice was ice cold, devoid of any fear. If anyone so much as steps onto my front porch, I will hand over the financial forensics report I have already compiled on you directly to the authorities. I know about the Delaware Shell Company. I know about the smurfing transactions. I know exactly which accounts you routed the money to in Vegas. DeAndre froze, the color completely draining from his face. How do you know that? Because I am a forensic accountant, you absolute fool, I whispered. You left a digital trail a mile wide. If you ever threaten me or approach me again, I will not just send you to prison. I will make sure the syndicate finds you first. Have a lovely evening." I walked past him, leaving him standing paralyzed in the middle of the restaurant. He was completely shattered, completely exposed, and entirely out of aggressive moves. As I stepped out into the cold night air, I reached into my coat pocket and turned off the digital voice recorder I had activated the moment he sat down. I now had his full, uncoerced confession on tape. The trap was fully armed and I was ready. The drive back to my townhouse in Alexandria was quiet, accompanied only by the rhythmic hum of my tires against the pavement. I walked through my front door, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place behind me with a reassuring click. I went straight to my home office, a room dominated by 3 large monitors and a secure server rack. I pulled the digital voice recorder from my coat pocket and plugged it into my workstation. The audio file of DeAndre confessing his gambling debts, his money laundering, and his threats against my property transferred flawlessly. I cleaned up the background noise of the restaurant, isolating his voice until every desperate, incriminating syllable rang with crystal clarity. I opened the encrypted folder containing his financial ruin. The bankruptcy filings from Nevada, the offshore routing numbers, the smurfed wire transfers. I compiled everything into a single, undeniable digital dossier. I created a secure, untraceable email address routed through 3 different virtual private networks. I attached the audio file and the financial documents. The recipient was my father, Pastor Thomas Hughes. I sent it directly to his private secure church email address, the one he checked obsessively every evening. I pressed send and watched the progress bar hit 100%. I did not include a message. The evidence spoke for itself. I knew my father. He was a man obsessed with control and appearances. When he opened that file and heard his beloved son-in-law admitting to defrauding a major corporation and laundering stolen money to a criminal syndicate, his entire world would fracture. I expected a phone call. I expected him to finally realize the magnitude of the mistake he and my mother had made. I expected him to turn his righteous anger toward the man who had actually jeopardized the family name. I left my computer and poured myself a cup of herbal tea. I watched the server logs. At exactly 9:45 that evening, the tracking pixel embedded in the email triggered. He had opened the dossier. 10 minutes later, the audio file was downloaded. I sat in the dim light of my living room waiting for the inevitable explosion, but my phone remained completely silent. The night passed with no text, no call, no frantic apology. The silence stretched into Friday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing the final details for my ultimate counterstrike at their upcoming gala when the sharp, demanding chime of my front doorbell shattered the quiet. I glanced at the security monitor. Standing on my front porch, wearing a dark wool overcoat and an expression of grim determination, was Pastor Thomas. He looked older than he had just 2 days ago. The perfectly constructed facade of the confident megachurch leader was fraying at the edges. I walked to the door and pulled it open, keeping the security chain unfastened, but my body blocking the entrance. "Hello, Father," I said, keeping my tone polite, but detached. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" He did not offer a greeting. He simply pushed past me, forcing his way into my foyer. He walked into my living room, looking around with a mixture of disdain and nervous energy. "Shut the door, Charmaine," he commanded, pacing in front of my fireplace. "We need to have a serious conversation." I closed the door and followed him, crossing my arms over my chest. "I assume you checked your private email last night?" He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes were hard, entirely devoid of paternal warmth. "I received an anonymous package containing deeply disturbing allegations against DeAndre. Audio recordings, financial records. It was a vile, cowardly attempt to slander a good man. But I know it was you, Charmaine. Only you have the technical skills to compile something so vicious." I stared at him, genuinely taken aback by his phrasing. slander, vicious. The audio is his own voice, Father. The financial records are verified bank statements. It is not an allegation. It is a fact. Your son-in-law is a criminal who stole $2 million to pay off a gambling syndicate. I went to see DeAndre at midnight, my father said, his voice dropping into his authoritative preaching register. I confronted him with your little file. And he broke down. He confessed his struggles to me. He is a young man carrying the immense pressure of providing for your sister. He made a temporary lapse in judgment under extreme stress. He is seeking the Lord for forgiveness, and as his pastor, I am guiding him through his redemption. I actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the high ceiling of the room. A temporary lapse in judgment. He laundered $2 million of stolen corporate funds. He threatened to have my house vandalized. He committed federal wire fraud, and he dragged you and Mother right into the center of it. There is no redemption here. There is only prison. My father took a step toward me, raising his hand in a gesture of divine authority. Do not speak of prison in this house. This is a family matter, and it will be handled internally. DeAndre is remorseful. He is family, and family protects its own. The church is looking at us, Charmaine. The community looks to us as a beacon of excellence and moral fortitude. If this scandal breaks, if the authorities get involved, the fallout will destroy everything I have built over 30 years. Your mother will be ruined in her social circles. The church board will demand my resignation. We will lose our standing, our respect, our entire legacy. I looked at the man who had raised me. I searched his face for any sign of remorse, any glimmer of protective instinct toward his own flesh and blood. There was none. He was entirely consumed by the preservation of his public image. And what exactly are you asking me to do? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He reached into his overcoat and pulled out the same crumpled release forms DeAndre had tried to force on me at the restaurant. He placed them on my kitchen island and smoothed them out with his hands. I need you to sign these papers, Charmaine. I need you to officially, retroactively authorize the sale to Apex Corporation. We will tell the corporate lawyers that there was a simple miscommunication regarding the power of attorney. You will confirm that your mother acted with your blessing, and the transaction will be legitimized. The $2 million will be written off as a legitimate investment into DeAndre business. The syndicate is paid off, the threat is neutralized, and the family name remains pristine. I stared at the papers, then back at him. You want me to sign away my inheritance legally, validating a fraudulent contract to cover up his crime. You want me to take the financial loss so he can walk away completely free. It is not a loss, it is a sacrifice, my father corrected smoothly, his tone shifting into heavy emotional manipulation. The Lord asks us to bear burdens for those we love. You have a successful career, you have plenty of money. You do not need that building. DeAndre and Kiara need this fresh start. If you do not sign this, your mother will face federal forgery charges. Do you really want to be the reason your own mother goes to jail? Do you want that sin on your conscience? He was weaponizing my mother, potential imprisonment against me, entirely ignoring the fact that she had committed the crime voluntarily. You and Mother chose to forge my name. You chose to steal. You chose to give that money to a degenerate gambler. And now you expect me to fall on my sword to save your reputation. You owe us, he barked, his patience finally snapping. We gave you life. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You have always been stubborn and difficult, always refusing to fall in line. For once in your miserable life, do what is right for this family. Show some grace. Sign the document. If you refuse, you will be entirely responsible for the destruction of this family. God will judge your hardened heart. The sheer weight of his hypocrisy hung heavily in the air. A father is supposed to protect his daughter. Instead, he was offering me up as a sacrificial lamb on the altar of his own massive ego. I looked down at the documents, then picked up the pen. Good girl, my father murmured, stepping closer with a triumphant gleam. I held the pen over the signature line, looked him dead in the eye, and dropped it. I will not sign them, I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality. his face contorted in shock, morphing into pure, unadulterated fury. "You are dead to us," he hissed venomously. "Do not show your face at our church again." I watched my father storm out of my house, the heavy oak door slamming so hard the framed pictures on my wall rattled. The threat of excommunication from his church was supposed to be the ultimate punishment, the final strike that would bring me to my knees. Instead, it felt like a heavy chain finally snapping. I locked the door and went about my weekend finalizing the details for the impending corporate collision. The deadline Richard Vance had set was Monday morning. I knew Apex Corporation would not simply send another strongly worded letter. They were a multi-billion-dollar equity firm accustomed to crushing opposition through sheer intimidation. They would come for blood. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, overcast chill. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, my armor for the battle ahead. I arrived at my office at 8, double-checked the encrypted files on my server, and placed a pristine manila folder precisely in the center of my desk. At exactly 9:15, my assistant Maya buzzed my intercom. Her voice was uncharacteristically tight, carrying a distinct edge of panic. "Charmaine," she said quickly, "there are several people here to see you. They do not have an appointment. They are accompanied by law enforcement. Send them back to the main conference room," I replied calmly, not missing a beat. "I will be right there." I picked up the manila folder and walked down the glass-walled corridor. My staff was actively trying not to stare, but the presence of uniformed police officers in a high-end forensic accounting firm was impossible to ignore. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the conference room. Standing at the head of the long mahogany table was Richard Vance. He looked exactly as he sounded on the phone, a man wrapped in an expensive suit and unearned arrogance. Flanking him were two local police officers, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Another man, likely a junior associate, stood behind Vance holding a leather briefcase. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. I placed my folder down and folded my hands over it. "To what do I owe this overwhelming display of authority?" Vance sneered, slamming a thick stack of papers onto the table. "We are done playing games over the phone, Ms. Hughes. This is a court-certified eviction notice for the U Street property, along with an official demand for the immediate surrender of the title deed and all physical keys. You are illegally occupying a property that belongs to Apex Corporation. If you do not hand over the keys right now, these officers will escort you off the premises, and you will be facing criminal charges for obstruction and extortion." I looked at the two police officers. They seemed slightly uncomfortable being used as corporate muscle, but they maintained their professional stoicism. "Officers," I asked politely, "are you here to arrest me, or are you just here to ensure the peace during a civil dispute?" One of the officers cleared his throat. "We are here to serve the eviction notice, Mom. If you refuse to comply with a lawful property transfer, we will have to escort you from the building and let the courts handle the criminal aspects." "I understand completely," I said, offering them a reassuring smile. "However, there will be no arrest today, and there will certainly be no eviction. Mr. Vance here has brought you out under false pretenses." Vance scoffed loudly, pacing a few steps. "Do not listen to her. She is a disgruntled former owner trying to shake us down for more money after we already paid $2 million for the asset. Hand over the keys, Charmaine. Your delaying tactics end today." I slowly opened my manila folder. "Actually, Richard, my delaying tactics were simply giving you enough rope to hang yourself." I slid a thick-bound legal document across the long table. It stopped precisely in front of him. "I suggest you read that very carefully before you make another threat in the presence of law enforcement." Vance glared at me, then looked down at the document. "What is this garbage?" "That garbage," I explained smoothly, "is a certified court-recorded irrevocable trust. Specifically, the Charmaine Hughes Legacy Trust. If you look at the dates stamped on the first page, you will notice that it was officially established and notarized exactly 24 hours before my mother signed your fraudulent contract." The junior associate leaned over, his eyes scanning the page. Vance's face tightened as he read the legal jargon. I continued my explanation, ensuring the police officers heard every single word. "As a seasoned corporate attorney, you know exactly what an irrevocable trust means. It means the asset is completely locked. It cannot be sold, it cannot be transferred, and it certainly cannot be demolished by a wrecking crew. When my mother sat in your office and signed that purchase agreement, the U Street property was no longer mine to sell, which means the contract you are holding is entirely null and void. Vance looked up, his arrogance faltering, replaced by a sudden sharp panic. This is a trick. We have a signed power of attorney. We ran a title search. You ran a title search 48 hours before the closing. I corrected him sharply. Had you run it the morning of the signing, you would have seen the trust. And as for your power of attorney, let us discuss that. I pulled a copy of the forged document from my folder and held it up. This is a limited medical proxy from over a decade ago. It does not grant real estate transaction rights. Furthermore, the signature on the bottom is a blatant forgery. My mother altered the document and hired a fraudulent notary from her church to stamp it. The room went dead silent. The two police officers exchanged a meaningful glance. The nature of the call had just violently shifted from a routine civil eviction to a massive corporate fraud investigation. Vance's face was now completely drained of color. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. "You are telling me," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "that your own mother forged a legal document to sell a property she did not own." "That is exactly what I am telling you," I replied. "I am also telling you that the $2 million your firm wired into my parents' joint account is no longer there." They immediately transferred the funds to my brother-in-law, DeAndre, who then laundered the money through offshore accounts to pay off illegal gambling debts. I pulled the financial forensics report I had compiled on DeAndre and slid it across the table to join the trust documents. Here is the complete financial trail. You will find bank routing numbers, time-stamped wire transfers, and the names of the underground syndicates he paid off. The junior associate grabbed the financial report, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. "Mr. Vance," the associate stammered. "She is right. The money hit the account and was immediately splintered into dozens of microtransactions. It is completely gone." Vance collapsed into the leather chair behind him. His aggressive posture had entirely dissolved. He was no longer a corporate shark. He was a lawyer who had just authorized a $2 million wire transfer to a group of con artists, and he was going to have to explain this catastrophic failure to his board of directors. One of the police officers stepped forward, his tone shifting from authoritative to investigative. "Ms. Hughes, if what you are saying is true, this is a massive case of federal wire fraud and identity theft. Have you contacted the authorities?" I looked directly at the officer. "I am a forensic accountant, officer. I gather the evidence. What Apex Corporation decides to do with it is their prerogative. But I will state for the official record that I never authorized the sale. I never received a single dime of that money, and my property is legally protected by the trust. Any attempt to evict me or claim ownership of the U Street building will be met with a massive countersuit for harassment and corporate negligence." Vance dragged his hands down his face, a gesture of profound defeat. He looked at the forged power of attorney, then at the financial forensics report. He was rapidly calculating the legal nightmare he had just walked into. "Your parents," he muttered, staring blankly at the table. "Your parents stole $2 million from Apex Corporation." "Yes, they did," I answered cheerfully. "They used their standing as respected community leaders to blind your due diligence team. They thought they could get away with it because they assumed I would quietly take the fall to protect their precious social reputation. They were wrong." Vance stood up abruptly, grabbing the documents and shoving them into his briefcase. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and absolute fury. The target of his wrath had completely shifted. He was no longer looking at me as an enemy. He was looking at me as a witness to a crime committed against his company. "Officers," Vance said, his voice tight with controlled rage, "we are leaving. There will be no eviction today." The officers nodded clearly, eager to step out of the corporate crossfire. They turned and headed for the door. Vance stopped at the threshold and looked back at me. "I have to report this to the executive board immediately. The Federal Bureau of Investigation will be involved by the end of the day. Your family is going to prison, Charmaine. All of them. I remain seated, my posture perfectly relaxed. I am fully aware of the federal sentencing guidelines for wire fraud, Richard. I suggest you move quickly. My parents are hosting a massive charity gala for their church this Saturday night. It would be a terrible shame if they used more stolen money to fund their caviar and champagne. Vance did not say another word. He turned and marched out of the conference room, followed closely by his associate. The heavy doors swung shut, leaving me entirely alone in the quiet space. I let out a slow, steady breath. The first major hurdle was cleared. My property was safe. The legal threat against me was entirely neutralized. I had successfully redirected the crushing weight of Apex Corporation directly onto the people who actually deserved it. My parents thought they could steal my future to fund their fake empire. Instead, they had just invited a multi-billion-dollar corporate predator right into their living room. But simply sending the lawyers after them was not enough. My mother and father had spent the last 3 days destroying my reputation in the community. They had cost me clients. They had turned my own relatives against me with their fake tears and pious lies. They were still planning to stand on a stage this weekend and accept the applause of their congregation wearing designer clothes bought with stolen money. I stood up, gathered my remaining files, and walked back to my office. The corporate lawyers would handle the legal destruction. But the social destruction, the complete dismantling of their fraudulent respectability, that was a job I was going to handle personally. I opened my calendar and looked at the date for the Church Platinum Gala. I had a stunning dress to buy and a very public entrance to plan. The war was moving out of the shadows and directly onto their main stage. Saturday evening arrived with an electric current of anticipation humming beneath my skin. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my bedroom, critically assessing my reflection. For a war fought in the blinding spotlight of high society armor is everything. I had selected a stunning emerald green silk evening gown that draped perfectly across my silhouette. It was elegant, commanding, and unapologetically expensive. I paired it with minimalist diamond drop earrings and a sleek classic updo. I did not look like the estranged, bitter daughter my parents had described to their congregation. I looked like a woman who held the absolute power to dismantle their entire world. I slipped my platinum VIP donor badge into my designer clutch. My mother had gone to great lengths to ensure my name was strictly banned from the guest list, but she had severely underestimated my resources. 2 days ago, my forensic accounting firm had quietly made a maximum tier corporate donation to the church charity fund under a subsidiary name. That massive donation automatically generated an all-access platinum VIP badge, guaranteeing me a seat at the most exclusive tables in the venue. I picked up my car keys and walked out the door, ready to crash the party of the decade. The church annual Platinum Fundraising Gala was not held in a gymnasium or a community center. It was hosted at the most prestigious, exclusive country club in downtown Washington, D.C. This was the crown jewel of my parents' social calendar. It was a night designed explicitly for the affluent African-American elite to network, parade their wealth, and secure their standing within the community. As I pulled my car up to the valet stand, the sheer scale of their hypocrisy was on full display. A line of luxury vehicles wrapped around the driveway. Men in bespoke tuxedos and women in glittering designer gowns stepped onto the red carpet, greeted by flashing cameras hired by the church media team. My family was inside drinking top-shelf champagne and soaking up the adoration of the crowd, completely oblivious to the federal investigation I had unleashed upon them just 5 days prior. I handed my keys to the valet and walked gracefully up the sweeping marble steps of the country club. The heavy mahogany doors were held open by white-gloved attendants. The moment I stepped into the grand foyer, the oppressive weight of fake respectability washed over me. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the loud echoing sounds of performative laughter. I bypassed the main registration desk, simply flashing the heavy metallic platinum donor badge attached to my clutch. The usher took one look at the corporate logo and the VIP designation, bowed his head respectfully, and immediately unclipped the velvet rope to let me through. No questions asked. Money and status were the only languages these people truly understood, and tonight I was speaking it fluently. I walked into the main ballroom and the sight before me was nothing short of a theatrical masterpiece. The room was dripping in crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces of white roses and gold-accented tables. It was a visual representation of the kingdom my father had built on the backs of his congregation. I stayed near the shadows of the arched columns at the back of the room, taking a moment to survey the battlefield. It did not take long to spot them. My mother Vivian was holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by a tight circle of prominent church elders and elite socialites. Vivian looked like a queen holding her royal reception. She wore a lavish sequined silver gown that caught the light with her every movement. Her smile was practiced, her posture rigid with self-importance. Even from a distance, I could hear her loud, boastful voice, carrying over the gentle hum of the string quartet playing in the background. She was putting on the performance of her life. I slowly moved closer, remaining just out of her direct line of sight, listening as she painted her masterpiece of lies for her captive audience. "And we are just so incredibly blessed," my mother gushed, pressing a hand to her chest, in a display of fake humility. "DeAndre's new real estate venture is already exceeding all of our expectations. Thomas and I were more than happy to liquidate one of our older unused commercial properties to provide him with the $2 million seed capital. It is all about building generational wealth and supporting our young visionary Black men. You know how important family unity is to us. We simply had to bless him with the resources he needed to change the world." The women around her nodded in awe, murmuring their praise for her generosity. It was sickening. She was standing there bragging about a $2 million investment that was entirely stolen, forged, and subsequently gambled away by the very man she was currently praising. She was wearing stolen money. She was breathing stolen air. I shifted my gaze slightly and found DeAndre. He was standing near the open bar, a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand. He was sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning of the ballroom. His smile was manic, his eyes darting nervously toward the entrance every few seconds. He knew the syndicate was looking for him. He knew the corporate lawyers from Apex were mobilizing. But he had to stand there and play the role of the successful tech founder because my parents demanded it. Right beside him stood my sister Kiara. The golden child was entirely in her element, wearing a custom red velvet dress and laughing loudly at a joke someone had just made. She was completely oblivious to the absolute peril her husband had placed them in. She was just happy to be the center of attention, soaking up the prestige of being married to the man of the hour. They looked perfect. They looked untouchable. It was the exact moment I decided to step out from behind the column and walk directly into the light of the crystal chandeliers. I did not rush. I walked with a slow, measured, predatory grace, letting my heels click rhythmically against the polished marble floor. As I moved through the crowd, the conversations around me began to falter. Heads turned. Whispers erupted like tiny sparks catching fire in a dry forest. The elite members of the Jack and Jill network, the same people who had been sending me hateful messages all week, stared at me in absolute shock. I was supposed to be the disgraced, excommunicated daughter hiding in shame. Yet here I was, dripping in emerald silk, looking more powerful and composed than anyone else in the room. I kept my chin high, offering a cool, detached smile to the people who were visibly struggling to process my presence. Kiara was the first one of my family members to spot me. She was in the middle of taking a sip of champagne when her eyes locked onto mine. She choked, sputtering the expensive drink down the front of her red velvet dress. DeAndre turned to see what had caused her reaction, and all the remaining color instantly drained from his face. He looked like he had just seen a ghost, his hand trembling so violently that the ice clinked loudly against the side of his bourbon glass. Kiara quickly handed her glass to a passing waiter and marched aggressively in my direction, her face twisted in a mask of furious indignation. She intercepted me near the center of the ballroom, completely disregarding the stares of the surrounding guests. "What the hell are you doing here, Charmaine?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but laced with absolute venom. "You are not welcome here. Dad officially banned you from this church and all of its events. You have a lot of nerve showing your face after what you tried to do to my husband. Turn around and walk right back out those doors before I make a massive scene. I stopped and looked her up and down, my expression completely unbothered. You already made a scene when you posted those fake tears on the internet, Kiara. I am just here to enjoy the catering. Besides, I think making a scene tonight would be highly detrimental to your husband's fake tech empire. Have you asked him how the offshore accounts are doing lately? Kiara's eyes narrowed in confusion for a fraction of a second before the anger returned. I do not know what kind of psychotic lies you are spinning, but you need to leave. Now. She abruptly turned around and frantically waved her hand, signaling for one of the large suit-clad private security guards stationed near the entrance. The guard immediately jogged over, looking tense and ready for a physical altercation. Kiara pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. "This woman is trespassing!" Kiara ordered, her voice trembling with rage. "She is not on the guest list and she is harassing the VIP donors. I want her physically removed from the premises immediately. Escort her out." The security guard stepped directly into my path, crossing his arms over his chest, to physically block me from taking another step. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I am going to have to ask you to come with me to the exit. We do not want any trouble tonight. Please cooperate." The surrounding guests had completely stopped talking. A tight circle had formed around us, the wealthy congregation watching the drama unfold with barely concealed delight. My mother had noticed the commotion and was currently pushing her way through the crowd, her face pale with shock as she realized I had breached her fortress. I did not look at the security guard. I kept my eyes locked directly on Kiara's face. I slowly opened my designer clutch, the metallic clasp making a sharp click in the silent room. I reached inside and pulled out the heavy gold-plated VIP Platinum donor badge attached to a black silk lanyard. I did not hand it to the guard. I held it up right in front of Kiara, face letting the light catch the engraved corporate logo and the word Platinum stamped across the front. "I am not trespassing, Kiara," I said, my voice echoing clearly for everyone in the immediate vicinity to hear. "My firm made a $50,000 corporate donation to the charity fund 2 days ago. That makes me one of the highest-tier platinum donors in this entire room. If you attempt to throw out your biggest financial benefactor, the country club management will have you removed, not me." The security guard looked closely at the badge, immediately recognizing the highest-level clearance the venue offered. He instantly stepped back, uncrossed his arms, and offered a quick nod of apology. "My apologies, Ms. Hughes. Enjoy your evening." He turned and walked away, completely ignoring Kiara's furious, open-mouthed stare. I smiled warmly at my sister, watching the absolute realization of her powerlessness wash over her features. "Like I said, Kiara, I am just here for the catering and the speeches. I hear Dad has prepared a wonderful sermon about family integrity tonight. I wouldn't miss it for the world." I slipped the badge back into my clutch and effortlessly glided past her, moving closer to the main stage. The tension in the room was suffocating. The calm was officially over. The massive storm was about to break. The clinking of silverware against fine china slowly faded as the string quartet brought their performance to a graceful close. A hushed reverence fell over the ballroom. The spotlight shifted, illuminating the grand stage at the far end of the hall. Pastor Thomas Hughes stepped up to the mahogany podium, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that fit perfectly, his silver hair catching the bright stage lights. This was his domain. He thrived on the undivided attention of his congregation, feeding on their adoration like oxygen. I stood near the edge of the stage, perfectly positioned in his peripheral vision. He noticed me, and for a fraction of a second his confident smile faltered. His hands tightened around the edges of the podium. But a seasoned performer never breaks character. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and projected his booming, charismatic voice across the silent room. "Good evening, my beloved friends, family, and esteemed members of our community." My father began, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered here tonight not just to celebrate another successful year of our charity initiatives, but to celebrate the very foundation of our community: family." He paused, allowing the word to hang in the air, A smattering of applause broke out, led enthusiastically by my mother, who was sitting at the center table right in front of the stage. "We live in a world that constantly tries to tear us apart," he continued, his tone dropping into a serious preaching cadence. "But a strong family, a family rooted in integrity, loyalty, and faith, can weather any storm. Tonight, I want to talk to you about legacy. I want to talk about generational wealth. It is not enough to simply acquire blessings for ourselves. We must pass them down. We must empower the next generation to build empires of their own." He gestured toward the front table, specifically pointing at DeAndre, who was rigidly clutching his water glass. "Look at my son-in-law DeAndre," my father proclaimed proudly. "A brilliant young man with a vision for the future. When he came to Vivian and me with his plan for a groundbreaking tech startup, we did not hesitate. We knew that to build generational wealth, sacrifices had to be made. We sold a valuable piece of commercial real estate, a family asset, to provide him with the $2 million seed capital he needed to launch his dream. Because that is what family does. We invest in each other. We lift each other up." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. People stood up from their chairs, clapping and cheering for my father's boundless generosity and DeAndre's bright future. My mother dabbed at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, soaking up the admiration of the wealthy socialites surrounding her. Kiara beamed, wrapping her arm around her husband. DeAndre forced a sickly, terrified smile, acknowledging the crowd while sweat visibly dripped down his temples. It was the perfect picture of Black excellence and familial devotion. It was a masterpiece of deception, and it was time to tear it down. Right as the applause began to peak, the heavy double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom violently burst open. The sound was so loud it echoed over the clapping, causing dozens of heads to snap toward the back of the hall. The doors had been pushed open by Richard Vance. The lead attorney for Apex Corporation strode into the country club like a man on a warpath. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He wore a sharp, dark business suit carrying a thick leather briefcase. He was flanked by two private investigators he had clearly hired to track my family down after our disastrous meeting at my office. The ushers tried to stop him, but Vance simply flashed a federal court document in their faces and kept walking. His eyes scanned the massive ballroom, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the designer gowns, and the sheer opulence of the event. He saw the stolen money dripping from every corner of the room. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. I stepped out from the shadows near the stage and walked calmly down the center aisle to meet him halfway. The crowd parted around us, murmuring in confusion. The applause completely died out, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. My father stood frozen at the podium, his mouth slightly open, the microphone amplifying his sudden, sharp intake of breath. "Ms. Hughes," Vance said loudly as we met in the middle of the aisle. His voice carried across the silent room, sharp and aggressive. "I followed your advice. We mobilized the firm resources. We traced the wire transfer and confirmed the fraudulent notary." I offered him a polite professional nod. "Excellent timing, Richard. My father was just telling the congregation all about his brilliant investment strategies. Would you like to introduce yourself to the board of directors?" We turned and walked toward the stage together. The tension in the air was so thick it felt combustible. Vivian stood up from her chair, her face draining of all color. Thomas gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He leaned into the microphone, trying to salvage the situation before it completely detonated. "Excuse me," my father boomed, trying to project authority. "We are in the middle of a private fundraising gala. You are interrupting a sacred event. Security, please escort these people out of the building." The country club security guards hesitated, recognizing my platinum donor badge and clearly intimidated by Vance's aggressive demeanor and the two investigators flanking him. Vance did not even slow down. He marched right past my mother table, ignoring her panicked gasp, and walked directly up the short flight of stairs to the stage. I followed right behind him, my emerald gown sweeping across the polished wood floor. I stepped right up to the podium, standing shoulder to shoulder with my father. I leaned into the microphone. The sound system picked up my voice, broadcasting it crystal clear to the hundreds of elite guests staring at us in absolute shock. "Good evening, everyone. I said smoothly, my tone entirely conversational. Please forgive the interruption to Pastor Hughes' beautiful sermon on integrity. I know he just gave you a very touching story about family sacrifice and generational wealth. Unfortunately, it was an absolute lie. Charmaine, my father hissed, covering the microphone with his hand. Stop this right now. You are destroying everything. I will ruin you. I looked him dead in the eye and swatted his hand away from the microphone. You already tried, father, I replied coldly into the mic. Allow me to introduce the gentleman standing next to me. This is Richard Vance. He is the lead corporate counsel for Apex Corporation, a multi-billion-dollar equity firm based out of New York, and he is incredibly angry to be here tonight. Vance stepped forward, completely taking over the stage. He did not need a microphone. His voice was trained to dominate federal courtrooms, and it easily filled the silent ballroom. I am here representing Apex Corporation, Vance announced, glaring down at my mother and DeAndre. 5 days ago, my firm wired $2 million into a joint account controlled by Pastor Thomas Hughes and his wife Vivian. We were led to believe we were purchasing a commercial property located on U Street. We were presented with a signed contract and a notarized power of attorney. The congregation began to whisper frantically. Church elders exchanged alarmed looks. Kiara dropped her hand from DeAndre's shoulder, staring at her husband with sudden dawning horror. As it turns out, Vance continued, his voice dripping with venom, the property did not belong to Thomas or Vivian Hughes. It belonged solely to their daughter Charmaine, who had secured it in an irrevocable trust. The power of attorney presented to my firm was a heavily altered medical proxy from over a decade ago. The signature on the contract was a complete forgery. Pastor Hughes and his wife committed blatant identity theft and federal wire fraud to steal $2 million from my corporation. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Someone in the back dropped a champagne glass, the crystal shattering loudly against the marble floor. Vivian collapsed back into her chair, pressing her hands against her face. It gets worse, I said, leaning back into the microphone. Because I know you are all wondering why a respected pastor and his wife would risk federal prison. They did it for the man sitting right there. I pointed directly at DeAndre, who was practically hyperventilating at the front table. They stole $2 million and immediately transferred it to DeAndre to fund his visionary tech startup. I pulled a small stack of papers from my clutch and held them up. But there is no tech startup. DeAndre registered a fake shell company in Delaware 3 weeks ago. He has no employees, no product, and no business plan. What he does have is a catastrophic gambling addiction. Within 24 hours of receiving the $2 million, DeAndre splintered the funds and wired every single penny to offshore accounts to pay off his debts to an underground sports betting syndicate. He laundered the money my parents stole. Liar! Kiara screamed from the front table, jumping to her feet. She was shaking, her face flushed red with panic and humiliation. You are making this up. You are just jealous. DeAndre, tell them she is lying. Tell them. She grabbed her husband's arm, violently shaking him. But DeAndre could not speak. He was staring at Richard Vance with the wide, terrified eyes of a man who knew his life was effectively over. He did not deny it. He just sat there trembling. Kiara looked at his face, and the truth finally shattered her delusion. She let go of him and stumbled backward, covering her mouth as a sob tore from her throat. This is a family matter, my father yelled desperately, trying to wrestle the microphone back from me. We can handle this internally. This is a misunderstanding. The funds will be replaced. It ceased being a family matter the second you forged a legal document to defraud a major corporation. Vance fired back, stepping between me and my father. You do not handle federal wire fraud internally, Pastor Hughes. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has already been notified. Your assets are currently being frozen. Every bank account, every property deed, including this church charity fund, if we discover any of our stolen money was funneled into it. The mention of the church charity fund sent the congregation into an absolute frenzy. The board of directors and the church elders immediately stood up, shouting demands for an explanation. The elite Jack and Jill members, who had spent the entire week praising my parents, were now looking at them with pure disgust. The facade of respectability had been completely obliterated in less than 5 minutes. My father looked out at the chaotic ballroom. His kingdom was collapsing in real time. The people who had worshipped him just 10 minutes ago were now demanding his resignation. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a terrifying, venomous hatred. "You did this," he whispered furiously. "You brought the devil into my church. You destroyed your own family." I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. "No, Father," I replied quietly, ensuring only he could hear me. "I just turned on the lights. You destroyed yourselves." I stepped back from the podium, leaving him to face the wrath of Richard Vance and his furious congregation. The public unmasking was complete. But the ultimate twist of the knife was still waiting. They thought Apex Corporation was their biggest problem. They still had absolutely no idea who actually owned the company they had just defrauded. I walked down the short flight of stairs from the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the wood. The ballroom was in a state of paralyzed shock, the kind of silence that precedes a massive structural collapse. Richard Vance remained on the stage answering furious, hushed questions from the church elders who had stormed up to confront my father. But my focus was entirely on the center table, the VIP table. My mother was still slumped in her chair, her face buried in her hands while Kiara stood frozen, her tear-streaked face a portrait of absolute devastation. I reached the table and picked up my mother-untouched glass of champagne, moving it aside to clear a space on the pristine white tablecloth. From my designer clutch, I pulled out the neatly folded copies of the evidence. I did not just hand them to my mother. I spread them out across the table like a dealer laying out a losing hand in a high-stakes poker game. Church deacons and elite socialites from neighboring tables immediately crowded closer, craning their necks to see the documents that were about to send their beloved pastor wife to federal prison. "Let us look at the anatomy of a forgery," I announced, projecting my voice so the surrounding crowd could hear every clinical detail. I tapped my manicured finger against the first document. "This is the original medical proxy I signed 15 years ago when I had my tonsils removed. It explicitly grants limited healthcare decision-making powers and nothing else." You can see the original notary stamp from a hospital administrator dated in 2010. I slid the second document next to it. "And this is the document my mother Vivian Hughes presented to the corporate lawyers at Apex Corporation last week. Notice the discrepancies. The healthcare clauses have been digitally scrubbed and replaced with boilerplate real estate transaction language. But my mother is not a forensic expert. She left the original margins intact, which means the text alignment is completely off. Furthermore, she needed a fresh notary stamp to make the document appear legally binding for a current sale." I pointed to the bottom corner of the forged paper. "She went to Marcus, the assistant treasurer of this very church, and convinced him to illegally stamp this document using his official notary seal. She told him it was just a technicality for a family transfer. Marcus did not verify my signature. He did not call me. He just blindly followed the orders of his pastor wife. That single stamp upgraded this from a desperate lie to a federal crime." Vivian's head snapped up from her hands. Her perfectly styled hair was now slightly disheveled, and her makeup was smudged beneath her eyes. She slammed her hands flat against the table, her silver sequins catching the harsh glare of the chandelier. "You are a liar," she screamed, her voice cracking in a high-pitched, hysterical register. "She is a liar. Do not look at those papers. They are fake. She fabricated all of this because she has always hated this family. She is trying to destroy us out of spite." I did not flinch. I just looked at her with an expression of profound pity. "You cannot scream your way out of a federal indictment, Mother. The FBI already has the digital footprint of the wire transfer. They have the IP address of the computer you used to alter the document. They know exactly when and where you printed it." She lunged forward, her hands clawing desperately at the papers on the table, trying to snatch them away. I let her take them. "They are just copies," I said calmly, watching her frantically tear the heavy stock paper into tiny pieces. Tearing up the evidence in front of a room full of witnesses does not exactly scream innocence, does it? The crowd gasped as Vivian ripped the documents, her breathing ragged and heavy. The elite women of the network, the same women she had been boasting to just 30 minutes ago, physically backed away. One of the church deacons, a retired judge, adjusted his glasses and looked at my mother with absolute disgust. "Vivian," he said, his voice trembling with disappointment. Tell me you did not involve Marcus in a forgery scheme. Tell me you did not bring criminal liability into this sanctuary. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless sob came out. She looked toward the stage, searching for her husband, but Thomas was entirely surrounded by the furious church board of directors. He was fighting his own battle, desperately trying to salvage his ruined career, completely abandoning her to face the angry mob alone. While Vivian was having her very public meltdown, my peripheral vision caught a sudden, jerky movement near the open bar. DeAndre. In the midst of the chaos, with all eyes glued to my mother and the stage, my brother-in-law had slowly backed away from the VIP table. He was currently sidestepping along the edge of the ballroom, his head ducked low, making a desperate break for the heavy service doors leading out to the kitchen and the rear parking lot. He was abandoning his wife. He was abandoning the family that had just committed a federal crime to save him. He was choosing self-preservation, just like a true coward. Kiara saw him too. She reached out a trembling hand. DeAndre. She whimpered, her voice barely audible over the shouting. Where are you going? Do not leave me here. He did not even look back. He broke into a panicked sprint, shoving past a waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes. The tray crashed to the floor, glass shattering and expensive alcohol splashing across the marble, but DeAndre kept running. He reached the heavy wooden service doors, threw his entire body weight against them, and burst through into the dimly lit hallway. He thought he had escaped. He thought he could just disappear into the night and leave my parents to face the FBI and the violent gambling syndicate alone. But I am a forensic accountant. I calculate every variable and I anticipate every possible exit strategy. When I planned my entrance tonight, I did not just buy a platinum donor badge. I also made a very generous cash donation to a premier private security firm based in downtown Washington, D.C. They specialize in high-risk asset protection and corporate extraction. I had given them a photograph of DeAndre and very explicit instructions regarding his movements. Less than 10 seconds after DeAndre disappeared through the service doors, a loud commotion echoed from the hallway. There was the distinct sound of a physical struggle, a muffled shout, and the heavy thud of someone being slammed against a wall. The shouting in the ballroom instantly ceased as the congregation turned their attention toward the back of the room. The heavy wooden doors slowly swung back open. DeAndre was not running anymore. He was being frog-marched backward into the bright light of the ballroom. Two massive security contractors dressed in tactical black suits with earpieces securely in place held him by his arms. His feet were practically dragging on the floor. His expensive designer jacket was torn at the shoulder and his tie was askew. He looked completely pathetic, a fraud stripped of his final illusion. "Let me go!" DeAndre yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic as he struggled fruitlessly against the iron grip of the contractors. "You cannot hold me here. This is kidnapping." The lead contractor, a towering man with a thick beard and cold eyes, easily forced DeAndre to his knees right in the middle of the shattered glass and spilled champagne. He looked across the room, his eyes scanning the crowd, until he found me standing near the center table. Ms. Hughes, the contractor, called out, his deep voice carrying easily over the stunned silence of the congregation. The target attempted to breach the perimeter. He was trying to access a vehicle in the rear loading dock. "We have secured him as requested." I offered the contractor a brief appreciative nod. "Thank you, gentlemen. Please keep him exactly right there. We are expecting federal agents to arrive shortly, and I would hate for them to miss out on the guest of honor." The congregation erupted into absolute pandemonium. Women shrieked, clutching their pearls and designer clutches. Men shouted, demanding answers, and pulling their wives away from the center of the room. Kiara dropped to her knees, burying her face in her hands, her perfect golden child image completely destroyed. Vivian fell out of her chair, hyperventilating, as the reality of her impending imprisonment finally crushed her spirit. On the stage, Pastor Thomas Hughes stood completely alone. His microphone had been cut off by the sound engineer. Now their elite world was burning to the ground. The true masterstroke was still waiting to be played by me. The two massive security contractors kept DeAndre firmly pinned to the marble floor. The sheer humiliation of the moment finally broke whatever fragile mental dam he had left. He did not try to stand up. He did not try to maintain his arrogant facade. He simply collapsed inward, his shoulders heaving as a pathetic guttural sob tore from his chest. It was not a dignified cry. It was the ugly, desperate weeping of a cornered coward who knew he had reached the absolute end of the line. I stepped closer, looking down at him. "Tell them, DeAndre," I commanded, my voice easily cutting through the stunned silence of the ballroom. "Tell your adoring congregation exactly what you did with the $2 million. He looked up, his face slick with sweat and tears. "I lost it," he wailed. "I lost all of it. There is no tech company. I was in a hole with a sports betting syndicate out of Baltimore. They were going to kill me. When Thomas and Vivian handed me that wire transfer, I sent every single penny to the bookies. I had to survive." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Hearing forensic evidence was one thing, but hearing the golden son-in-law confess to laundering stolen money for an illegal gambling ring during a church gala was a completely different level of scandal. "You sent it all to the bookies," Kiara whispered. She had been standing frozen a few feet away, but now she slowly walked toward him. Her red velvet dress looked completely out of place against her pale, horrified face. All those late nights working at the office, all those emergency trips to Vegas to meet with investors. "You were gambling." DeAndre reached out a trembling hand toward her. "Kiara, baby, please understand. I was trying to win it back. I wanted to give you the life you deserve, the cars, the bags, the house. I had to keep up appearances for your parents. They expected so much from me." Kiara's face contorted from profound shock into pure, unadulterated rage. "You parasite," she shrieked. "You absolute fraud." Her voice echoed off the high ceilings, shattering any remaining illusion of their perfect marriage. "You told me we were rich. You told me the startup was about to go public. We have maxed out 5 credit cards this month alone because you said the corporate accounts were just temporarily frozen for the real estate transfer. We are broke. You made me broke." She lunged at him. The golden child, the woman who had spent her entire life carefully curating an image of effortless perfection, completely lost her mind. She threw herself at DeAndre, her manicured hands striking his chest, his shoulders, his face. "You ruined my life!" she screamed hysterically, hitting him over and over again. "You stole my sister money. You made my parents commit a crime. You are going to jail and I have nothing. I have absolutely nothing." The security contractors did not even flinch. One of them simply reached out with a massive arm and pulled Kiara back, holding her at a safe distance, while she continued to thrash and scream curses at her husband. Church deacons were openly staring in disgust. The elite Jack and Jill members were whispering furiously, no doubt already composing the text messages that would permanently exile Kiara from their social circles. My father finally found his legs. Pastor Thomas Hughes scrambled down the stairs from the stage, his face flushed a deep, dangerous purple. He pushed past a group of stunned church elders and rushed directly toward Richard Vance, who was standing near the VIP table, observing the chaos with cold corporate detachment. Vivian, who was still hyperventilating on the floor, saw her husband moving and desperately crawled up, grabbing the edge of the table to pull herself to her feet. "Mr. Vance," my father pleaded, his voice stripped of pastoral authority. It was the desperate tone of a man begging for his life. "You have to listen. We did not know he was a gambler. We thought we were investing in a legitimate business. We are victims of his deception just as much as your corporation is." Vivian stumbled to my father's side, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "Yes," she cried, clasping her hands together in a begging gesture. "He tricked us. He manipulated our love for our daughter. You cannot send us to prison for trying to help our family. We are good people. We are leaders in this community." Vance looked at them with profound disgust. "Good people do not forge legal documents, Mrs. Hughes. Good people do not alter medical proxies and hire fraudulent notaries. You signed the contract. You authorized the wire transfer. You committed the federal offense. The fact that your son-in-law is a degenerate gambler does not absolve you of wire fraud. It makes you both criminals and fools." But we can fix this, Thomas interrupted, frantically grabbing Vance by the sleeve of his suit. Vance violently yanked his arm away. Thomas held his hands up in surrender. We can pay you back. We can establish a payment plan. I am the head pastor of this church. I have a salary. We have assets. We can mortgage the house. Just give us time. Do not call the FBI. If you press charges, I will lose my church. I will lose everything. You already lost everything the moment you decided to steal $2 million. Vance replied coldly. Apex Corporation is not a predatory lending agency. We do not do payment plans for stolen funds. Corporate policy dictates that any fraud over $1 million is immediately escalated to federal authorities to satisfy our shareholders and regulatory compliance. You stole from an equity firm. You are going to face the federal government. Vivian let out a piercing wail and turned her fury entirely on DeAndre. You monster! She screamed, pointing a shaking finger at him. You greedy, worthless monster. We risked everything for you. We broke the law for you. And you threw it all away on sports bets. I hope you rot in prison. I hope they lock you under the jail. DeAndre sneered, his fear briefly eclipsed by spite. Oh, shut up, Vivian. You did not do it for me. You did it so you could brag to your country club friends about your rich son-in-law. You handed me that money because you were too arrogant to admit I was a failure. You forged Charmaine's signature without a second thought. You belong in prison just as much as I do. The family had completely devoured itself. The loyalty they had preached about just 15 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a vicious, feral desperation to save themselves at the expense of everyone else. Thomas was blaming DeAndre. Vivian was blaming DeAndre. DeAndre was blaming Vivian. Kiara was screaming at all of them. They were tearing each other apart in front of the very community they had sacrificed me to impress. I stood silently near the edge of the carnage, watching the destruction unfold. My father turned to me, his eyes wide with a sudden, sickening realization. Charmaine, he begged, his voice cracking. Charmaine, please. You have money. You have a successful firm. You can pay them back. You can cover the $2 million. If you write a check to Apex right now, this all goes away. We will give you the U Street building. We will give you whatever you want. Just save your mother and me. I looked at the man who had ordered me out of his house just yesterday. I looked at the man who had cost me my biggest client to protect his fake image. I slowly shook my head. You cannot give me the U Street building, Father. It already belongs to me. I will not spend a single penny to save you from the consequences of your own greed. You made your bed. Now sleep in a federal cell. Thomas fell to his knees right there on the marble floor of the country club. He buried his face in his hands, openly sobbing as the ruins of his kingdom crashed down around him. The congregation watched in horrified silence. The pastor who had preached about integrity was kneeling in a puddle of spilled champagne, begging his estranged daughter to buy his freedom. Vance checked his luxury watch, completely unmoved by the emotional display. The authorities should be arriving shortly. I suggest you all save your breath for your respective defense attorneys. He looked over at me, his expression softening just a fraction into something resembling professional respect. Ms. Hughes, I believe our business here is concluded. My firm will be in touch regarding the formal nullification of the contract. Not quite yet, Richard, I said smoothly, my voice carrying a sudden sharp authority that made Vance pause. You see, there is one very important final detail regarding Apex Corporation that you and your executive board have overlooked. Richard Vance stopped in his tracks, turning back to face me, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. What detail, he demanded, his corporate patience clearly wearing thin. You have already provided the forensic evidence proving the fraud. The contract is void. The matter is now in the hands of federal investigators. There is nothing left to discuss regarding my firm. I smiled, a slow, calculated expression that made him shift uncomfortably. You operate under the assumption that Apex Corporation is an independent entity, Richard. But as the lead counsel, you should be intimately familiar with your own corporate umbrella. Apex is a wholly owned real estate subsidiary of Vanguard Horizon Equity. And Vanguard Horizon Equity does not finalize any asset acquisition over $1 million without the direct approval of its senior risk management board. Vance stared at me, his eyes narrowing as he tried to piece together where I was going with this. Yes, he replied cautiously. Vanguard Horizon is our parent company. We submit our quarterly reports to their board. What does that have to do with you? I took a step closer to him, lowering my voice just enough to force him to listen intently. My name is Charmaine Hughes. You know me as the disgruntled daughter who refused to hand over the keys to a building. But if you call your executive director right now and ask him who sits on the shadow board of Vanguard Horizon Equity, who personally designed the forensic tracking software your entire firm uses, and who holds the title of Senior Executive Director of Risk Management, you are going to hear a very familiar name. The silence that followed was absolute. Vance's face went completely blank as my words registered in his mind. He physically recoiled, taking a small step back from me. The arrogant, aggressive corporate shark who had threatened me in my office just hours ago completely evaporated. He was replaced by a terrified employee who suddenly realized he had been barking orders at his ultimate boss. You, Vance stammered, the color rapidly draining from his cheeks. You are the shadow board member. You are the risk director for Vanguard. I offered a sharp nod. And you, Richard, authorized a $2 million wire transfer without verifying a decade-old medical proxy. You bypassed my risk assessment protocols because you wanted to close a lucrative deal quickly. Vance looked like he might actually faint. He quickly looked down at the floor, his posture instantly shifting from dominant to entirely submissive. Ms. Hughes, he said, his voice shaking with sheer panic. I had no idea. The paperwork appeared legitimate. The title search was outsourced. I assure you, if I had known your position within the parent company, I would have flagged the transaction immediately. I waved my hand dismissively. Do not apologize to me, Richard. Your incompetence actually served a very useful purpose. It allowed me to catch a group of thieves red-handed. Turn around and look at them. Vance slowly turned to look at my parents. Thomas and Vivian were still frozen near the center table, their minds struggling to comprehend the massive power shift that had just occurred. They had spent my entire life belittling my career. They had mocked me, calling me a simple software developer, a boring accountant who sat in a dark room. They genuinely believed I was a lower-class citizen in their world of elite socialites and megachurch prestige. Now they were staring at the reality of my actual existence. I did not just work for a company. I controlled the massive equity firm they had just defrauded. My father pulled himself up from the floor, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the edge of the VIP table. You own the company, he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. You own Apex Corporation. You knew about the sale. I turned my attention entirely to him, projecting my voice so the entire congregation could hear the final devastating truth. I do not own it entirely, Father. I am a senior board member and a major shareholder of the parent company. But yes, I knew about the sale. In fact, I knew about the sale the exact moment your fraudulent contract was scanned into the Apex digital system. The forensic tracking software I designed immediately flagged the transaction because it recognized my own name on the property deed. Vivian let out a strangled gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. You knew, she cried hysterically. You knew we were trying to sell the building, and you did not stop us. You let us sign the papers. You let us take the money. You set us up. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed across the silent ballroom. Set you up. Mother, I did not forge your signature. I did not force you to go to Marcus and lie to get a fake notary stamp. I did not force you to wire $2 million to a degenerate gambler. You did all of those things completely on your own because you are greedy, arrogant, and morally bankrupt. I took a slow walk around the VIP table, looking at the shattered remains of my family. I could have easily stopped the transaction on day one, I explained, making sure every word landed like a physical blow. I could have flagged the file, canceled the wire transfer, and locked the deed. But if I had done that, you would have just found another way to steal from me. You would have kept playing the loving parents while stabbing me in the back. I realized that the only way to permanently protect myself from you was to let you hang yourselves with your own rope. I let the transaction proceed. I let you commit the federal crime. I let you take the money knowing full well that DeAndre was going to lose every penny of it. Kiara, who had been sobbing quietly on the floor near her restrained husband, looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You let him gamble it away," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "You knew he owed the syndicate and you let him take the money." I looked down at my golden child sister. "DeAndre gambling debts are his own problem, Kiara. Just like your fake marriage is your problem. You all thought you were so much smarter than me. You thought you could orchestrate this massive theft and just hand me a $100,000 tip to keep me quiet. You thought you were stealing from a faceless corporate entity. You did not realize you were stealing directly from my boardroom." My father's legs gave out again and he slumped heavily into a chair. The psychological devastation was absolute. He was a man who craved power and control above all else. For 35 years, he believed he held absolute authority over me. He believed he could command my obedience, manipulate my emotions, and dictate my worth. Now he was looking at the daughter he had thrown away and realizing she held the power to completely destroy him with a single phone call. I was the puppet master. I had orchestrated this entire sequence of events leading him directly onto this stage so he could confess his sins in front of his precious congregation. Richard Vance cleared his throat nervously, stepping forward to stand respectfully slightly behind my shoulder. It was a clear, physical demonstration of his submission to my authority. He was no longer the lead attorney running the investigation. He was my subordinate, waiting for instructions. "Ms. Hughes," Vance said quietly, addressing me with a newfound terrifying reverence. "The authorities are en route. The evidence is secured." As the senior risk manager of the parent company, the decision on how to proceed with the prosecution of Thomas and Vivian Hughes rests entirely with you. Do we hand the forensic files over to the federal agents when they arrive, or do you have alternative directives? The entire ballroom held its collective breath. Hundreds of eyes darted between me and my parents. The church elders, the elite socialites, the security contractors holding DeAndre on the floor. Every single person in that room understood exactly what Vance had just said. My parents' fate was no longer in the hands of the legal system or the corporate board. It was resting entirely in my palms. My father looked up at me, tears streaming freely down his face. He did not yell. He did not threaten me with God judgment or family exile. He just looked at me with the pure naked terror of a man staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. "Charmaine." My father begged, his voice a pathetic whisper. "Please, you are my daughter. I am your father. I am begging you. Do not do this. Do not send us away." I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no lingering sense of familial duty. The emotional coldness that had permeated my childhood home had finally solidified inside my own chest, but I was using it as a weapon instead of a shield. They had never treated me like a daughter. I was just a resource to be exploited, an obstacle to be moved. And now the resource was bankrupting them. "I am not your daughter, Thomas," I said, my voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "I am the senior risk manager of Vanguard Horizon Equity. You stole $2 million from my shareholders. You committed wire fraud. You committed forgery. You brought a criminal enterprise into this church." I turned my head slightly to address the attorney standing behind me. "Richard, I want the full forensic dossier handed over to the FBI the moment they walk through those doors. I want maximum federal charges filed against all three of them. There will be no leniency. There will be no settlements." Vance nodded quickly, his relief evident. "Understood, Ms. Hughes. It will be done exactly as you have instructed." I looked back at my parents one last time. Vivian was sobbing uncontrollably into the tablecloth. Thomas was staring blankly at the floor, his spirit completely broken. DeAndre was whimpering in the grip of the security guards. Kiara was alone, stripped of her wealth and her golden status. The fake empire was gone. The respectability was completely shattered. I had won the war they started, and I had done it without raising my voice. I had simply let their own greed consume them. The distant piercing sound of police sirens began to wail outside the country club, growing louder with each passing second. The flashing red and blue lights reflected against the massive crystal windows of the ballroom, casting an eerie glow over the silent, terrified congregation. The authorities had arrived to collect the pieces of the shattered Hughes family. But before the federal agents could walk into the room and place the handcuffs on their wrists, I had one final piece of business to conclude. The $2 million DeAndre lost still needed to be accounted for on my company ledger. And I knew exactly how I was going to force my parents to pay me back every single dime. The flashing lights from the emergency vehicles outside cast frantic red and blue shadows across the ballroom walls. The local police had arrived to secure the premises, and the federal agents were no doubt right behind them. Time was rapidly evaporating, but I moved with deliberate, unhurried precision. I walked back to the center table where my parents remained completely paralyzed by their impending reality. I picked up my designer clutch, unclasped it, and withdrew a fresh, neatly folded stack of legal documents. I placed them directly on the white tablecloth right over the spot where my mother had just spilled her tears. "What is that?" my father asked, his voice a hollow rasp. "This is your only lifeline," I replied coldly, smoothing out the thick pages. "You owe my corporation $2 million. As the senior risk manager, I am legally obligated to recover those stolen assets. Right now, the federal agents stepping out of their vehicles are preparing to arrest you for wire fraud and forgery. The federal guidelines for a $2 million corporate theft carry a mandatory minimum of 10 to 15 years in federal prison. However, the justice system looks very favorably upon criminals who make immediate full financial restitution before the indictment is officially filed." Vivian raised her head, her ruined makeup making her look like a smashed porcelain doll glued back together. "We do not have $2 million in cash," she sobbed, her voice trembling violently. "You know we do not. DeAndre took everything. We are ruined." "I know you lack the cash, Mother," I said, tapping my finger against the top page of the legal document, "but you possess a fully paid-off luxury estate in Maryland, an estate recently appraised at exactly $2.4 million. This document is a warranty deed and an irrevocable transfer of property. You are going to sign the Maryland mansion over to my holding company right now." My mother let out a half-gasp, half-scream. "No," she shrieked, clutching the edge of the table to anchor herself to her fake reality. "You cannot take my house. That is my home. I decorated every room. My garden club meets there. The elite society hosts the summer gala in my backyard. You cannot strip me of my home. Where are we supposed to live? How can you be cruel?" I stared down at her, feeling absolutely no sympathy. "You did not care where I was going to live when you forged my signature to sell my property," I reminded her smoothly. "You did not care about my financial stability when you handed my inheritance to a gambling addict. You tried to leave me with nothing so you could brag to the garden club you are now crying over. Your house is no longer your sanctuary, Mother. It is corporate collateral." Thomas slammed his fist weakly against the table, a final display of broken authority. "We will not do it," he growled, his eyes darting toward the entrance where police were gathering. "You cannot force us to sign away our home under duress. Any lawyer will have this thrown out of court. We will fight you, Charmaine. We will declare bankruptcy." I leaned forward, invading his space until he looked me directly in the eyes. "If you declare bankruptcy, the federal government will seize the house anyway to pay off the corporate restitution order," I explained in a freezing whisper. "If you let the government take it, you get no credit for cooperation. I am holding the complete forensic folder. I have the audio of DeAndre confessing and the digital footprint of the forged notary stamp. If you sign this deed right now, I will officially log the $2 million corporate debt as repaid. I will tell the federal agents restitution is made, which will instantly reduce your charges from a massive corporate felony to a lesser offense. You might get probation, but if you refuse to sign this paper, I will hand the unredacted file to the FBI, and I promise you, Thomas, you will die in a federal penitentiary." My father swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He looked at the documents, then at the heavy wooden doors. Local police officers had entered the room and were taking custody of DeAndre from the security contractors. DeAndre was sobbing loudly, begging the officers not to let the gambling syndicate find him. The reality of the criminal justice system was unfolding right in front of their eyes. The prestige of the church, the expensive suits, the designer gowns, none of it mattered anymore. They were entirely at my mercy. "Sign it, Thomas," I commanded softly. "Sign away the mansion, or put your hands behind your back and walk out of here in handcuffs. Make your choice right now." He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the solid gold pen resting near his empty water glass. His hand shook so violently that the pen rattled against the table. Vivian grabbed his arm, her nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo jacket. "Do not do it, Thomas," she wept, her voice entirely broken. "Do not give her the house. We will be the laughingstock of the entire community. We will have to move into an apartment. People will know we are broke." Thomas looked at his wife, his expression utterly defeated. "Vivian, look around us," he whispered hoarsely, gesturing weakly to the silent congregation. "They already know. The church is gone. The reputation is gone. If I do not sign this, we are going to prison. I am too old to survive federal prison." He gently pulled his arm away from her grasping fingers. He hovered the gold pen over the signature line on the warranty deed. A heavy tear slipped from his eye and splashed onto the crisp white paper, smudging the black ink of the printed text. He pressed the pen down and hastily scribbled his signature, legally signing away the crown jewel of his fake empire. He pushed the paper toward Vivian. "Sign it," he ordered, his voice completely devoid of life. Vivian sobbed, a deep, agonizing wail echoing across the silent ballroom. She took the pen from her husband. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred, sorrow, and terror. "You are a monster," she hissed through her tears. "You are no daughter of mine." I smiled, a cold, empty expression. "I know, Mother. I am the senior risk manager. Now sign the document." She looked down at the paper, her hand hovering over the line. She closed her eyes, tears dripping off her chin, and quickly signed her name next to my father's signature. The moment the pen lifted from the page, she completely collapsed forward, burying her face in her arms on the table, weeping hysterically. The deed was done. The sprawling Maryland mansion, the symbol of their arrogance and ultimate social weapon, now legally belonged to my corporate holding company. They had traded their dream home for a chance to avoid a concrete cell. I picked up the documents carefully, inspecting the signatures to ensure they were legible and legally binding. I slid the papers back into my designer clutch and snapped it shut with a sharp, satisfying click. It was the sound of absolute victory. I had stripped them of their stolen wealth, destroyed their fake social standing, and completely neutralized their ability to ever threaten me again. They were broke, disgraced, and entirely broken. Richard Vance stepped forward securely, holding his heavy leather briefcase in both hands. "The federal agents have just arrived in the front lobby, Ms. Hughes," he informed me quietly, his tone remaining deeply respectful. "They are asking for the corporate liaison." I nodded, turning away from the pathetic sight of my parents weeping at the gala table. "Thank you, Richard. Let us go greet them. I will inform them that Vanguard Horizon Equity has successfully recovered the stolen assets, but we are still pressing forward with the formal criminal complaint regarding the forgery." "Wait," my father croaked, his head snapping up. "You said you would help us if we signed the house over. You said we would get probation." I stopped and looked back at him over my shoulder. "I said I would log the debt as repaid, Thomas. And I will. That will certainly help your sentencing guidelines when you stand before a federal judge. But I never said I was dropping the criminal charges for the forgery. You still committed identity theft. You still broke the law. You just do not owe my company money anymore. I suggest you find a very good public defender. Your church salary is not going to cover the legal fees you are about to incur." I turned my back on them for the final time. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my emerald gown gliding smoothly across the marble floor. The elite congregation parted to let me through, refusing to meet my eyes. They were terrified of me. They had spent years whispering about the quiet, awkward daughter of Pastor Hughes, completely unaware that I was building an impenetrable fortress of wealth and legal power. I walked straight through the heavy mahogany doors, leaving the ruins of my family behind me, ready to hand the evidence over to the federal authorities and finally close this dark chapter of my life forever. I had survived their toxicity, and now I was the one walking away with absolute freedom and undeniable power over my own destiny. 6 months passed. The blistering Washington summer gave way to the crisp winds of late autumn. Time has a remarkable way of stripping away illusions and leaving only the undeniable truth. For my family, that truth was a bitter pill they were forced to swallow every single day. The fallout from the Platinum Gala was immediate and completely merciless. The church board of directors held an emergency meeting the very next morning. By noon, my father was officially ousted from the pulpit. He was stripped of his pastoral title pension and access to charity funds. The congregation he had manipulated for decades turned their backs on him entirely. Without his salary and the sprawling Maryland mansion, which I promptly sold to a private developer, to recover the corporate funds my parents were forced to drastically downsize. Thomas and Vivian Hughes now live in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. There are no crystal chandeliers. There are no garden club meetings. The elite network excommunicated my mother the moment the scandal hit the local news. She sits in a small living room surrounded by the few pieces of discount furniture they could afford, isolated from the high society she sacrificed me to impress. DeAndre did not escape the wrath of the federal government. Because the gambling syndicate was involved, the FBI made an example out of him. He is currently serving a 7-year sentence for money laundering and wire fraud. The tech empire he constantly bragged about was replaced by a concrete cell. As for my sister Kiara, the reality of being married to a convicted felon and stripped of her parents' financial support hit her like a freight train. The designer bags and luxury cars were repossessed to pay off legal fees. The golden child was finally forced to enter the real world. She currently works at a retail cosmetics counter in a mid-tier shopping mall. She spends her days applying foundation to the exact same women who used to attend her lavish dinner parties. They pretend not to recognize her, and she pretends not to see their pity. While their world crumbled into dust, mine was just beginning to bloom. I stood on the sidewalk of U Street, the autumn sun warming my face, holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. The historic brick building my grandparents left me was no longer an empty warehouse gathering dust. It was completely transformed. The massive front windows gleamed in the bright sunlight, displaying the sleek modern interior of the newly established Hughes Innovation Hub. I had used my own capital to renovate the entire property, turning it into a state-of-the-art business incubator specifically designed to fund and support young, brilliant Black female entrepreneurs. A crowd of over 200 people gathered on the sidewalk. There were local politicians, community leaders, and dozens of ambitious women holding business plans, eager to start building their own legacies. Maya, my brilliant assistant who had stood by me through the darkest days of the corporate war, stood at my right side, holding the red velvet ribbon taut. Richard Vance, who had shockingly become a reliable corporate ally after learning his lesson in humility, stood on my left, representing the philanthropic branch of Vanguard Horizon Equity. I looked out at the vibrant, supportive community surrounding me. There was no fake respectability here. There was only genuine ambition, mutual respect, and authentic empowerment. I raised the scissors and sliced cleanly through the red ribbon. The crowd erupted into genuine, enthusiastic applause. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of lightness in my chest. I had taken the very building my family tried to steal to fund a lie, and I turned it into a fortress of truth and opportunity. My grandparents would have been incredibly proud. Later that evening, long after the crowds had dispersed and the first cohort of entrepreneurs had settled into their new offices, I stood alone on the rooftop of my building. I looked out over the glowing skyline of Washington, D.C. For 35 years, I had allowed my family to dictate my worth. I had internalized their coldness, believing that my quiet nature and my dedication to my career made me somewhat less valuable than my loud, performative sister. I had accepted my role as the family scapegoat because it was the only way I knew how to exist in their orbit. But walking through the fire of their ultimate betrayal had burned away all of my lingering doubts. I realized that the greatest tragedy in life is not being rejected by toxic people. The greatest tragedy is changing who you are to earn the approval of people who do not even know how to love themselves. Family is not defined by shared bloodlines or fake smiles at country club events. Family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unshakable loyalty, and a commitment to seeing each other succeed. I had to lose my biological family to discover my true strength. I had to let them destroy themselves so I could finally build a life entirely on my own terms. I am Charmaine Hughes. I am a forensic accountant, a corporate executive, and the sole architect of my own destiny. Thank you so much for following along with my story. Navigating family trauma is incredibly difficult, but coming out on the other side with your dignity and your success intact is the ultimate victory. I would love to connect with all of you in the comments section below. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own peace and future? How did you find the courage to finally choose yourself? Let me know your thoughts, and please do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience, financial empowerment, and taking back your power. Until next time, please stay strong, stay focused, and always protect your own true worth. The greatest lesson from this ordeal is that blood does not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your resources, or your future. For years, I believed that enduring my family's toxic behavior was the price I had to pay for their love. But true family is built on mutual respect and loyalty, not manipulation and greed. When I finally stopped shielding them from the consequences of their own actions, I discovered my true power. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm. Your worth is defined by your own resilience, not their validation. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace, please hit the like button, subscribe for more empowering stories, and share your own experiences in the comments below.